My name's Andrew Elder. I'm a comic artist from Greenock. I also work in the games industry doing concept art. I'm a colourist for DC, working on various projects at the minute, mainly kind of Batman Beyond, and Batman Unhinged. I'm also working on the brand new Mars Attacks series from IDW, which a lot of people think is based on the Tim Burton kind of film, but it's not. It's based on the original card. There's three, well, arguably four, art roles within comics, general kind of mainstream comics. The third role, which is the role I take, is a colorist, which is generally obviously the colouring, the one that has the colouring, but it's sort of more than that. We're also the ones that sort of establish the mood and the depth of the page usually, sort of build an atmosphere into it. You know, the language of kind of colour and colour theory can invoke different emotions, and that's what our role is meant to be. It's adding kind of the mood and the tone to the page, and you're sort of complementing the feel of it that the penciler has already established, who is the person that would take the script from the writer and draw the page. How much detail they put in can vary, but generally it's a pretty tight drawing. Second, there would be the inker, who would take the pencil drawing and they basically clean it all up, whereas the penciler might be a very kind of sketchy artist. The inker's there to give that consistent shape and line. So those are the roles in comics, and I'm the colourist. So, well, where you get your ideas is one of the kind of most complicated questions you can ask anyone, because you know, the inspiration comes from kind of anywhere. You might be walking down the street and just see someone converse in a certain way, and it sparks off this idea of what are they doing, why are they doing it, and how are they doing it, what if this happened to them instead, you know. Things spawn kind of organically. I have a combination of that, and because I have a sleeping disorder, something called DSPS, which is delayed sleep phase syndrome, but it's a more specific version of that, which is non-24-hour sleep-wake phase syndrome, which essentially means that my body runs on a slightly longer clock than most people. Who is one of these? And then as I was going back to kind of looking at the watches again, I just sort of was sort of leaning forward and looking down slightly, and I was like, there's this arm just around my stomach here. Well, I'm kind of typing away, it's just there, and I'm like, whose arm is that? Well, even through sort of nursery and primary school, I kind of had won various kind of art competitions, and I'd say I loved to draw as a child. That's all I did. And then I went on to Greenock Academy. Well, from high school through our kind of like guidance, kind of careers advice guidance, when I mentioned I wanted to be an artist or a comic artist or animator, it was very much, no, you can't do that. It's like, you know, it wasn't so much I couldn't do it, I was like, well, I can't do it. It's like, to be honest, I don't really know how to advise you on it, but it was also recommending me to kind of follow different paths, follow kind of more sort of vocational work. By chance, picked up a perspective for the college, and saw that year they were starting a course in 3D animation. Obviously animation had been a huge love of mine when I was young. I was like, should I? And then, well, basically that day I went in, applied, and became the first student to be accepted onto this brand new kind of 3D animation course in the James Watt College. Got a fair few personal projects on the go that I'm kind of hoping to get out either this year or kind of into next year, depending how it works out. The first ones are my comic projects. I have two graphic novels I'm currently working on. One is co-written by myself and a man called Josh Wagner. The second one is completely mine, and it's based on an old idea I had actually when I was a teenager, but it's sort of updated and a bit more sort of, you know, less ridiculous teenage ideas in it. And that's called Orphans. Sorry, the other one was called Resistance. So Resistance and Orphans. Alongside that, I'm also developing a board game. But there's sort of come to light a thing that in my board game that I'm sort of actually thinking of trying to do a comic series that ties into it. I have a friend who I hadn't spoken to him a long time, but he's been on my Facebook. Transpires he's now a programmer at Microsoft in Japan. He's a coder, I'm an artist. a lot of the things I write are kind of what if scenarios, and just for example, there was a project that I was writing, because obviously the last few years there's been a huge number of zombie films come out, for instance, right? And I love zombie films, but there was a lot of them, a lot of exposure, a lot of kind of public love for them, and sort of annoying me a wee bit. But I still love zombie films, and I would always want, everyone loves the concept of, you know, survival and what you can do. But I started thinking, well, okay, so you got the zombie thing, you got the zombie apocalypse, everyone tells a story about either surviving or running away from it, or, you know, just generally surviving, living stuff in this zombie apocalypse. So I was wondering, what happens if there's this, you know, infection like in 28 days, like where everyone becomes zombies? What happens if it wears off? What happens if however many weeks down the line everything goes back to normal? And you have all these people that were infected, kind of waking up ill, you know, ill, ravaged a bit, but not really remembering what happened, maybe missing a limb, you know. But then you also have these people that were essentially living in hovels, killing their friends and family, and try to survive. And these other people might have kind of like vague, feverish memories of it. So you have two sects of kind of humanity, and the major population, the ones that were all infected, now want to hold these other people accountable. So it's kind of more of a political zombie drama that doesn't actually feature any zombies. So I like the kind of idea of taking kind of popular cultural things and thinking slightly differently about them. Don't steal that idea. But yeah, I mean, you've got that. I take a lot of inspiration from kind of dreams as well, because I tend to have I tend to dream very vividly, but I also tend to recall the dreams in a lot of detail. And I also get really emotionally invested in dreams, like the amount of times I've sort of woken up like either crying or kind of, you know, laughing, or just like experiencing entire lifetimes of kind of events and experiences in the space of, you know, a couple hours. And it's kind of bizarre. A lot of times where dreams sort of implant themselves as memories, and it's not till much later that I realise it didn't happen after a conversation with someone. Was like, oh, so what? Cowboys and Aliens was the first graphic novel I ever worked on. It was my first proper published book, and that, you know, they were already slating it to be a high profile book, and obviously eventually it was, but I'll be honest, dreadful work on my part. It was my first book, I was still learning. For that is like the comic companies are getting bought up. Obviously DC is part of Warner Brothers, and Marvel's part of Disney, and because so many eyes are on comics to basically pick the new big thing, there's so much money getting injected into comics that they don't necessarily need to be kind of sourcing externally anymore, because, you know, they're getting these big massive hits like Marvel. How long can Marvel run their company on from the 700 million or something that the Avengers has been making? One of the beauties of comics, which is what Platinum, as I mentioned about Cowboys and Aliens, did back in the day, their whole thing was that a comic book is sort of a visual representation of the final project. So it's sort of like your storyboard and your story in one. So it's much easier to bring to a producer or an exec and say, here's the project, because it's already visual. They can see it, they don't need to think about it, because, you know, traditionally a lot of these Hollywood guys, they're not that creative, they're money men. I into the one thing I like to be able to wake up and do something new. So if I'm honest, where I want to be in 5 years is a place where I don't have to wake up and necessarily worry about where the bill's coming that day. I can wake up and just say, I want to do this today. This is my next project for the next month, and do that, and it's comfortable, and I don't need to kind of worry. But also on a beach. Siring an air.
You know, spawning a million illegitimate children. Jenny McHale.